Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the studio this gorgeous Women's Day. And of course, we salute women all around the country, and we are celebrating a wonderful holiday all in obviously in celebration of being a woman. And we have some amazing women in our community. One of them is on our show in a few minutes' time. Her name is Nazrana Jassat. We're going to be talking conflict communication, not resolution, communication. Then we're also going to be looking at Nikki Sultan, and she's with an organization talking about Kids Lit Quiz, another amazing woman, and then Mothers Against Drug Abuse. So as you can see, really women working behind the scenes, making a big difference in people's lives. So on this Women's Day, it gives me great pleasure to showcase women of substance. The first one being Nazrana Jassat Tim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
For the purposes of this interview, we're going to talk conflict communication. Now, how is this different from conflict resolution?
Sister Julie, so I spent about 7 years, my early part of being here in South Africa. I was involved a lot in the field of anger and stress management, and I evolved from there and I moved on to emotional fitness and resilience. And I learned a huge amount within those fields, and I was very grateful to be working in those fields. So as much as people have thought that I have imparted knowledge to them, people don't realize how much I have actually learnt in return. So anger management, we eventually progressed from that, and I thought, you know, there's a need for conflict communication. So conflict resolution for me felt too reactive, and conflict resolution for me deals with the issue that's happening outside of you. So let's say, for example, you and I are having a fight, an argument, a battle, a challenge, whatever it is that's going on. People generally tend to focus on everything that's going on outside. And yes, we can have conflict resolution tactics where people come together and we discuss what's happening outside and we resolve the conflict.
When you talk about you and I having a conflict, but it's happening outside of ourselves, so to speak, give us an example.
So let's say, for example, we're working together and we're having an issue with maybe with expectations. Okay, maybe I have an expectation of the way the show needs to be run, and you have an expectation of the way the show needs to be run. Okay, but the fight is happening outside, so the battle is happening between us on the outside. So we'll come in and we'll sit down and we'll look at solutions to that particular conflict, and we'll go away. But very soon after that, similar conflicts will start to emerge with the same themes.
Why?
Expectations. Okay, so the battles actually, when I address conflict, and this is where I have moved away from conflict resolution to conflict communication, is that if people are having a battle, whether it's a husband and a wife, whether it's parents with their children, whether it's people in the workplace, colleagues, I'll say stop. Okay, let's listen, let's unpack the conflict, let's understand it. Let me talk to each one of you individually to understand what's going on. Let's unpack it. We'll look at all of that and I'll say, okay, let's park this. Let's park this for a little while and let's go do some work on yourselves. Let's go do some work within. Because very often, in fact, all the time, the way we deal with conflicts depends on what I call our conflict coding. Okay, how were we taught to deal with conflicts growing up? And that usually comes from observation. Yes, we can be told how to do things, but we really learn things from observing and we will learn that from our parents.
Let me stop you there, and we see a lot of this happening, playing out around us, sadly.
Yes.
If parents have their conflicts, there may be quiet discussions, there may be rowdy arguments, there may be fisticuffs, etc. And this plays out in front of their growing children. Obviously, those children are going to accept that that is the way conflict is resolved. Absolutely. And then going into their own relationships, that is how they know or don't know how to resolve issues. And they're just going to play out all of those dramas again. Is it ever too late to change those behaviors?
Never. I've had clients 65 years old sitting across from me. They'll walk in and they'll look at me and they'll scratch their heads and they'll think, what is this young
little
lady
girl
going to teach me?
Right.
And we just open up and we connect, because you connect on a human level. It doesn't matter how old you are. You connect on a human level and you talk about these things and you talk about the issues. And with the understandings and the knowledge that I have gained, I share that. That's all that I do, is I share a different way of being with people.
And hearing people, hearing what they're saying.
Hearing what they have to say.
And reframing it for them.
That's all. That's all that it is saying, okay, well, this is how you do things and this is how you've done things. Has it worked for you? How has it worked for you? How have your relationships around you fared? Would you say that you have cultivated and nurtured healthy relationships? So if we have to look at it as tending a garden, is your garden flourishing? Is it blooming? Or is your garden dead? Is it dry? Is it barren? And you have maybe just a few little blossoms here and there. So we want flourishing gardens of relationships around us. And that's the difference. It's just learning how to tend your relationships differently. And if you've received the downloads, what I call the downloads of conflict coding, to have come across in a negative way, where maybe it's quite extreme, maybe it's in the form of physical abuse, verbal abuse, swearing, shouting, screaming, emotional abuse, and then you get the other spectrums, and you get the sulking, the withdrawing, the complete avoidance of conflict because people are afraid of it. Let's brush it under the carpet. I'm saying no. Conflict is great. Conflict is a wonderful part of life, because actually, instead of destroying from conflict, you can embrace it and you can grow from it. So
it's the how.
It's the how to do it, and that's what I do in my programs. So,
all right, we're going to talk about the how right after the ad break. I'm talking to Nazrana Jassat Tim. She is now into conflict conversation. She comes from a history of obviously anger management, and you've heard her very illustrious background. She's written a couple of books, and inshallah, in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have her and Idris Kamisa in the studio together talking about the book they have co-authored on relationships. But for the purposes of this interview, we're talking conflict communication, not resolution, communication. It is Women's Day. I hope you're having a wonderful time. I hope your loved ones are spoiling you. Take it easy. And as we've promised, we bring to you today and the rest of the month, Women of Substance. I'm just thinking what a topic to be discussing today on Women's Day. We don't want any conflict in your home. Please let it be filled with love and peace. It is Women's Day, and I do hope you're enjoying a wonderful holiday. But if you do have an issue of conflict, then stay close to the TV and we'll perhaps give you a couple of steps on how you try and resolve your issues. Conflict communication versus conflict management or conflict resolution. How different are the concepts?
Okay, so conflict resolution traditionally will deal with two parties, will deal with the issue that has come up, and you'll get the mediators coming in to deal with the issue, And once we found a solution to that
a win-win
issue,
solution,
a win-win solution, then you move on.
Right.
But very often you'll still find these conflicts coming up. So the angle that I've used with conflict communication is, if we look at our beloved Rasulullah alayhi salam and his words, the greatest jihad, the greatest battle, the greatest war is the war within yourself.
Our nafs.
Exactly, the nafs. If we look at the Dalai Lama, Mahatma Gandhi, all these great spiritual leaders that the world looks to, they're all in that state of self-actualization, as we just mentioned. And they all tell you that if you want to find peace in the world, you find it within yourself. The problem is no one's given us the tools of how to do that.
And like you said, it's the nafs. It's all about me. Any situation that you're in, any given situation, conflict or otherwise, it's about me. You want to shine.
Oh, that's it. So what the thing about conflict communication is, we stop, we take a step back, and we go within, and we look at all the challenges within, all your basics of where you've learned your conflict from. How did your father deal with conflict? How did your mother deal with conflict? What is your relationship like with conflict? Do you avoid it? Do you take it up as a challenge and say, I'm going to win? Or do you find some form of growth and opportunity from it? And there's so many areas to look at. There's looking at your own expectations. There's looking at your belief systems. There's looking at your opinions. There's looking at your traumas. Trauma plays a very big part in your behavior.
What sort of traumas are we talking about?
We're talking about childhood trauma. We're talking about whether you have experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, as a child, or even emotional abuse. And emotional abuse can even come in the form of neglect. Neglect where parents had to work. Parents had to focus on just putting food on the table, but the child didn't feel any connection, and they felt emotionally neglected. So trauma is another whole area which is packaged. All of this is packaged within the whole framework of conflict communication. But it's going within, and it's looking at reprogramming the way you deal with conflict on a day-to-day basis.
Now, Nazrana, as you talk about conflict and you're bringing in the past, obviously the past defines who and what you are, the end result of what's sitting here in front of you and in front of me.
Yes.
This is all got to do with all of your past experiences.
Yes.
But it's years and years and years of conditioning.
Yes.
So here I'm sitting listening to you. You sound very inspiring, and I want to go and change the conditions in my relationships. It's not going to be, or can it be, an overnight success where I keep, with positive self-talk and keep minding how I respond to people?
So I think the first and most important thing to understand is that this is a process. It is a journey. You're not going to get there overnight, and you just have to keep going at it. There's layers and layers that we have to go through within ourselves, and we may be ready to face a certain part of ourselves, and we may be not ready to face other parts on ourselves. And this is all the letting go of the nafs, and this is all the letting go of the ego, and moving from places of judgments and criticism and low levels of self-worth, moving through all of that to acceptance, to love, to compassion, and to self-worth and self-respect. And that's what we need to do. And that is a process, and that is a journey. But it is the continuous looking at yourself. Where am I at right now? What am I feeling physically? One of the first and most important tools that we fail to use is our bodies. What is going on in our bodies right now? Are we feeling ill? Are we feeling hungry? Are we feeling tired? Because just those basics alone can put us into a brain chemistry that is ready for fight or flight, that is ready for conflict. We know
something as simple as that, being hungry, or hurting somewhere physically or otherwise.
Exactly, can put us into, it can set our nervous system off into that state of fight, flight, and we don't even realize it. So getting connected just simply with your body, and this is what I do in the program, is getting you connected with your body. How am I feeling now? Do I have a headache? What is my body scan? What is my emotional state? What particular emotion am I feeling right now at this very moment? Not 5 minutes ago, not what I'm worrying about in an hour's time, but right now. And that's the gift of presence, and that's the gift of mindfulness and awareness. And what are my thoughts? What am I thinking? What's going on in my head? So in my one book, I call it the threnemies. Do you have a threnemy? so it's a thought that's an enemy,
Right.
and what do those thoughts look like? Those thoughts that I have in my mind, if they were to take the form of someone physical, would I want to have that person as a friend in my life? Or would I not? Would I keep them out of my life? And that takes us to another step. What kind of people do we surround ourselves with? Do we surround ourselves with people who are continuously putting us down or breaking us down or belittling us? Or are we surrounded by people who are uplifting us, motivating us, nurturing us, believing in us, and looking for the best in us?
Now, you say it's a process. I'm sitting and thinking already how I'm going to start changing in my relationships with the different people in my life. But I know that it is a process. But when you start, and obviously one has to come to you, to someone like yourself,
yes,
for the counseling and the therapy. But little steps, what would you say they'd be? Do you start telling your loved ones around you that I'm rethinking how I interact with people? I'm rethinking, I want to change the way, I want to change my condition and the condition around me, the people around me. Do you start self-affirming yourself in the shower, for example? Do you write little notes, positive notes to your loved ones? How do you start this process? You know, you don't want them to think that you're going cuckoo.
Of course, absolutely. And I think probably one of the first steps in the process, before you can action anything, is to self-observe. Step back and watch yourself. Observe yourself. Observe, first and foremost, the interaction with yourself within. So those little conversations that you're having, stop and go, what's this about? What's this conversation about? Let's say, for example, your husband is doing something and irritating you. Be aware of that irritation rising in you. Stop and ask yourself, what is this irritation? Where is it coming from? Okay, so before you even begin to engage with the people around you, to change what's happening outside of you, you have to go in and you have to observe.
Let's take that example, my husband irritating me. How do I turn it around from it and stop it developing into a full-blown argument or a fight? What is it? What's my self-talk? Or perhaps the interaction I need to have with him to turn it around?
So very often when we're going into a phase of irritation, we're moving up what I call the spectrum of anger. Okay, so we're starting to hit onto the spectrum, and we'll probably can very soon start progressing into anger. And that can be fueled by, yes, what's happening outside, but it can also be fueled by our self-talk, as you say. And when we're in that state, we could be saying to ourselves, oh, you see, he's doing it again. He never listens to me. He doesn't understand what I'm going through. What have I done? I've made the biggest mistake of my life. And, the whole drama queen comes out. At that same point, what's happening is the chemistry in your body is releasing adrenaline and it's releasing cortisol. So it's putting you into a state of fight or flight. So if you can be aware of the irritation rising, if you can be aware of the changes in your body state, you start fidgeting more, your body language starts getting more irritable, or you pointing fingers, or you pacing.
Is it okay to stop him that point?
You stop yourself.
I'm trying. Is it okay to stop him and say, what you're doing is beginning to irritate me, and I'm afraid it's going to end up into a big blow up, and you need to understand why I find that action irritating. He may just fob me off, which might push me straight into anger.
He might.
Or hopefully he'll understand where I'm coming from.
So I would change that a little bit. Instead of saying what you're doing is irritating me, again, you're sort of putting it out there. You stop and you say, I'm starting to become aware that I'm getting quite irritated with the situation. I need to remove myself and figure out what's happening for me, and maybe we can discuss this later. And you step away, you go for a walk, you go for a run, you jump in the shower, you go drink some water, but you literally need to take a break. We call it a break of state. You break state. You move away because what's happened at that moment is you've been hijacked. Your brain has been hijacked. What we call the amygdala has hijacked your thinking center, and you're operating from your reptilian brain. So there's actually going to be no resolution. It's going to be like two lizards, two reptiles just having a battle. Nothing's going to be resolved.
Animal instinct
overtakes. The animal.
And unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So very quickly, in a half a minute, if somebody wants to engage or, consult with you, and I know it's different from person to person, but approximately how many sessions would they have to undergo? And is it best to come with the partner or themselves?
So I don't do one-on-one sessions any longer. I might see people for one-on-one sessions just to gauge whether they would be suitable or not, or I would have a phone conversation with them to gauge whether they're suitable. But I run what's called the Inside Out method. It's a 24-hour program. I call it just one day. It's just one day. You just need to commit one day of your life, and it will change the way you view things. So It's a group workshop that
How do people get hold of you?
They can go to my website. It's www.nazranajassat.com, and all the information is on the site.
Fascinating talking to you. It was lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you truly are a woman of substance.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, sister.
That was Nazrana Jassat, Tim, on this Women's Day, talking to us about conflict communication and how to get our relationships back on track.